Nocturnal Natterings, The Art of the Tease, A History. Introduction, The Universal Language of Desire. Welcome to Nocturnal Natterings. Tonight, we're exploring one of humanity's most enduring and provocative art forms, the tease. The deliberate dance between revelation and concealment, the promise that hovers just beyond reach, the performance that turns anticipation itself into pleasure. This isn't just about burlesque dancers and bow-tied Chippendales, though we'll certainly luxuriate in those details. This is about understanding how cultures across millennia have grappled with desire, performance, the body as spectacle, and the surprisingly complex politics of who gets to look, who gets to be looked at, and what it all means. Because here's the thing, the tease is ancient. It's practically hardwired into human sexuality and performance. But how we've expressed it, who's been allowed to do it, who's been allowed to enjoy it, and what consequences followed, that's where the story gets really interesting. So dim the lights, pour yourself something suitable for the late hour, and let's begin our journey through the scandalous, the sublime, and the surprisingly revolutionary history of the tease. Ancient provocations, the tease in the ancient world. The sacred and the sensual. Long before there were burlesque theatres or male revues, there was sacred sexuality. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 3000 BCE, temple prostitution was practiced as a form of worship. The goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, was associated with sexual love and warfare. Her temples employed sacred prostitutes who performed ritual dances and sexual acts as offerings to the divine. These weren't sleazy transactions in back alleys. These were religious ceremonies, and the performances involved elaborate costuming, veiling, and unveiling a ritualized tease that connected the earthly and the divine. The body wasn't shameful, it was sacred. Sexuality wasn't dirty, it was holy. Move eastward to India, and you find the Devadasi tradition dating back over 2,000 years. These were women dedicated to temple service, skilled in classical dance forms like Bharatanatyam. Their performances were highly stylized, involving intricate footwork, expressive hand gestures, and movements that celebrated the body's grace and sensuality. The dance told stories of divine love, often depicting the longing between devotees and gods, between human lovers. It was erotic, yes, but also artistic and spiritual. The costumes revealed and concealed simultaneously bare midriffs, but elaborate jewelry and draping that drew the eye while maintaining mystery. This is the tease in its earliest form, not crude exposure, but the art of suggestion, the dance of what's shown and what's hidden. Greece and Rome, where theatre met flesh. The ancient Greeks gave us drama, philosophy, and democracy. They also gave us some seriously provocative theatre. In Athens during the 5th century BCE, comedies by playwrights like Aristophanes featured bawdy humor and characters with exaggerated sexual features. Actors wore giant leather phalluses for comedic effect. Courtesans called hetairae were educated, sophisticated women who entertained at symposia with wit, music, and sexual allure. But it was Rome that really understood spectacle. By the late Republic and into the Empire, Roman theatres featured mime performances that grew increasingly explicit. Female performers called mimi would perform in sheer silk costumes that revealed more than they concealed. Some performances included actual sexual acts on stage, though this was controversial even in permissive Rome. The striptease as public entertainment has its roots here. There are accounts of performers who would gradually remove clothing during dances, working the crowd into a frenzy. The poet Juvenal and the historian Suetonius both reference these performances, usually with a mixture of fascination and moral disapproval, a dynamic that would repeat throughout history. Emperor Heliogabalus, who ruled from 218 to 222 CE, was notorious for hosting parties with elaborate sexual performances, including male dancers who performed for female audiences. The fact that this was scandalous even for Rome tells us something important. The tease, the erotic performance, has always been bound up with questions of power, propriety, and who gets to desire whom. Salome and the Dance of Seven Veils. We can't discuss ancient tease without addressing one of its most enduring myths, Salome and her dance. The story appears in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. Salome dances for her stepfather Herod Antipas at his birthday feast, and pleased with her performance, he promises her anything she desires. Prompted by her mother Herodias, she asks for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The Gospels don't actually describe the dance itself. But by the time Oscar Wilde wrote his play Salome in 1891, and Richard Strauss composed his opera in 1905, the Dance of the Seven Veils had become iconic, a striptease of mythic proportions, where each veil removed reveals more flesh and intensifies desire until Salome stands naked before Herod. Whether the historical dance actually happened this way is beside the point. What matters is that for thousands of years, Western culture has been obsessed with the image of a woman using her body, using the gradual revelation of her flesh, as a weapon, as currency, as power. The Dance of the Seven Veils is the ultimate tease, and it ends in death, which tells you everything about our ambivalence toward female sexuality and power. Eastern traditions, the art of suggestion. While Western traditions often emphasized the dramatic reveal, Eastern performance arts developed sophistication in suggestion and restraint. Chinese opera, with its elaborate costumes and stylized movements, could convey profound eroticism through nothing more than the flutter of a sleeve, a sideways glance, the arch of a foot. The geisha tradition in Japan, which formalized during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, perfected the art of allure through refinement. Geisha were not prostitutes, despite Western misconceptions. They were entertainers skilled in music, dance, conversation, and the tea ceremony. Their appeal lay in sophistication, in cultivated mystery, in the space between availability and distance. The back of a geisha's neck, left exposed while the rest was elaborately dressed, became an erotic focal point precisely because everything else was concealed. This is the tease at its most refined, not about nudity, but about aesthetic perfection and the promise of intimacy that may or may not be fulfilled. The pleasure is in the anticipation itself. Turkish and Middle Eastern belly dance traditions, which have ancient roots, similarly balanced revelation and concealment. Dancers wore costumes that exposed the midriff and emphasized hip movements while maintaining overall modesty. The dance was sensual but not explicitly sexual, inviting desire while maintaining boundaries. What's crucial to understand is that across these diverse traditions, the tease served multiple functions: religious ritual, artistic expression, social entertainment, and yes, erotic provocation. It was never just one thing. And the moment we try to reduce it to simple titillation, we miss the complexity of what these performances meant in their cultural contexts. The birth of burlesque, Victorian repression meets theatrical revolution. England and the origins of burlesque theatre. The word burlesque comes from the Italian burla, meaning joke or mockery. When burlesque emerged in England in the 1830s and 1840s, it had nothing to do with stripping. It was satirical theatre that mocked high culture, opera, and social pretensions. These were comedic, often musical performances that took serious subjects and made them absurd. Victorian England was a society of extraordinary contradictions. On the surface, rigid morality, sexual repression, women as pure domestic angels. Underneath, rampant prostitution, pornography, and a thriving underground of sexual entertainment. Burlesque existed in this tension, pushing against propriety while claiming theatrical legitimacy. The innovation came with Madame Vestris in the 1830s, who caused a scandal by performing male roles in tights that showed the shape of her legs. This seems absurd now, but in an era when women's legs were never seen in public, when ankles were provocative, this was revolutionary. She wasn't stripping, but she was revealing the female form in a way that shocked and thrilled audiences. By the 1860s, burlesque had evolved to include leg shows, performances featuring women in flesh-colored tights, short skirts, and revealing costumes. The content was still primarily comedic and satirical, but sex appeal had become central to the formula. The British Blondes and the American Revolution. When Lydia Thompson and her troupe, the British Blondes, brought their burlesque show to New York in 1868, they caused an absolute sensation. Thompson was beautiful, witty, and shameless. Her shows featured women in tights and short tunics performing energetic dances and bawdy comedy. The New York Times called it an offense against decency. It was a massive hit. The British Blondes proved there was enormous appetite for this kind of entertainment in America. Within a few years, burlesque theaters sprouted across the country. The form became distinctly American, rowdier, and more focused on female bodies than its British predecessor. Early American burlesque combined several elements: satirical skits, variety acts, singers, comedians, acrobats, and most importantly, beautiful women in revealing costumes. The shows were structured as revues with multiple acts, and while there was nudity, it was strategic: a flash of thigh, a bare shoulder, suggestive movements rather than full exposure. What made this controversial wasn't just the sexuality. It was that burlesque was popular entertainment, accessible to working-class men. The upper classes attended opera and theatre where women also appeared in revealing costumes, but those were art. Burlesque was lowbrow, which made it threatening to social order. The evolution of the tease, from revelation to strip. The actual striptease as we recognize it emerged gradually in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One origin story credits a performer whose costume strap broke during a show. As she fumbled to fix it, the audience went wild, and she realized removing clothes slowly could be more exciting than just appearing in scanty costume. Whether that story is true doesn't matter. What matters is the innovation. The performance wasn't the reveal itself, but the journey to it. The tease became the point. By the 1910s and 1920s, burlesque had fully embraced the striptease. Performers would come on stage in elaborate costumes with multiple layers, gowns, robes, veils, and remove them slowly over the course of a number, usually to increasingly up-tempo music. The bump and grind movement became signature, as did the playful interaction with the audience. This was the golden age of burlesque, roughly from 1920 to 1940. And it produced legends. The queens of burlesque. Gypsy Rose Lee is the most famous name in burlesque history. Born Rose Louise Hovick in 1911, She was pushed into show business by her domineering stage mother, later immortalized in the musical Gypsy. But Gypsy Rose Lee transcended her origins to become something extraordinary. What set her apart wasn't just beauty, she was striking but not conventionally gorgeous. It was intelligence, wit, and sophistication. Her strip wasn't crude, it was theatrical art. She wore elaborate gowns and removed them with grace and humor, engaging in witty banter with the audience. She quoted Shakespeare. She made jokes. She transformed the striptease from something men might be embarrassed to watch into something they could almost defend as artistic. She performed at the best venues, wrote mystery novels, hobnobbed with intellectuals. She proved that a burlesque performer could be smart, respected, and commercially successful. In a 1936 profile, The New Yorker treated her as a legitimate artist and cultural phenomenon. Sally Rand became famous for her fan dance, which she debuted at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. She performed nude except for two enormous ostrich feather fans, which she manipulated to reveal and conceal her body in fluid, dance-like movements. The effect was simultaneously erotic and elegant. Was she naked? Yes. Could you actually see much? Not really. That was the genius. She also performed her bubble dance, using a large translucent balloon as a prop. These weren't gimmicks, they were artistic innovations that elevated burlesque toward legitimate performance art. Sally Rand continued performing into her 70s and defended her work as beautiful and wholesome, arguing that there was nothing shameful about the human body presented artistically. And choreo, Tempest Storm, Blaze Star, Lily St. Cyr, these names meant something in mid-century America. They were stars, with followings and publicity machines. They appeared in magazines, made films, and earned real money. They had stage personas and signature moves. This wasn't just stripping, it was branded entertainment. What united the great burlesque performers was personality. They were characters. The strip was theater, a story told through costume, movement, and the gradual revelation of the body. The tease was psychological as much as physical. The politics of the tease. We need to pause and acknowledge the complexity here. Burlesque was empowering for some women. They made more money than they could in almost any other profession available to working-class women. They had independence. They had audiences who adored them. Some, like Gypsy Rose Lee, achieved genuine fame and respect. But burlesque also existed within systems of exploitation. Many performers were poor women with limited options. They faced social stigma, legal harassment, and an industry that often treated them as disposable. The male theater owners, managers, and patrons held most of the power. The male gaze was central to burlesque. These were performances created for heterosexual men's pleasure. Even when female performers wielded power on stage, even when they controlled their acts and made artistic choices, they were still operating within a framework where their value derived from male desire. This tension between empowerment and exploitation, between artistry and objectification, runs through the entire history of erotic performance. There's no simple answer. Both things were true simultaneously. The decline and the dirty. By the 1940s and 1950s, burlesque was under siege. Moral crusaders, newly empowered by wartime social conservatism, pressured cities to shut down burlesque theaters. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia famously closed New York's burlesque houses in 1942, claiming they were obscene and contributed to moral decay. As legitimate theaters closed, burlesque moved to seedier venues. The artistry declined. The performances became more explicitly sexual, less theatrical. By the 1960s, what was called burlesque was often just strip clubs with none of the theatrical tradition. The golden age was over. The tease had lost its art. What remained was just the strip. The sexual revolution and the rise of male stripping. Women's liberation and changing desires. The 1960s and 70s transformed American sexuality. The birth control pill, women's liberation, gay rights, the questioning of traditional gender roles, everything was up for grabs. Women were demanding equality, including sexual equality. They wanted the right to their own pleasure, their own desires. This created space for something previously almost unthinkable in mainstream culture, the commercialization of male sexuality for female pleasure. Male strippers existed before the 1970s, of course. There were underground clubs, private parties, gay venues where men stripped for other men. But mainstream, explicitly heterosexual entertainment featuring male strippers for female audiences? That was new. Some credit the Pippin Male Revue in Los Angeles in the early 1970s as a pioneer, but the real game-changer came in 1979 when a Los Angeles club called Destiny 2 was transformed into Chippendales. Chippendales, the revolution. Steve Banerjee, an Indian immigrant who owned Destiny 2, a failing bar in West Los Angeles, decided to try something different. Working with a choreographer named Nick DeNoyer, he created a show specifically designed to give women what men had enjoyed for decades, a theatrical strip show. The formula was careful. The men wore tuxedos that they gradually removed, but the final look was bow tie, collar, and cuffs, the costume that became iconic. They were muscular, tanned, and oil-slicked. The choreography was energetic, drawing from jazz dance and disco. The performances were cheeky, playful, designed to make women laugh while also turning them on. And crucially, this was positioned as a safe, fun night out for women. Groups of friends, bachelorette parties, birthday celebrations. The marketing emphasized that women could go out, have drinks, scream at attractive men, and feel no shame about it. For the first time, mainstream culture was acknowledging that women had sexual desires and might enjoy expressing them publicly. Chippendales was a phenomenon. By the mid-1980s, there were touring companies performing to sold-out crowds across America and internationally. The brand expanded to calendars, merchandise, even a TV show. Male strippers became a cultural icon, referenced in movies and TV shows, simultaneously mocked and celebrated. The male body as commodity. What Chippendales did was revolutionary in its cultural implications. For centuries, the mainstream visual economy of desire had gone one direction. Men looked, women were looked at. Men consumed images of women's bodies. Women's role was to be beautiful and desirable. Chippendales flipped the script. Suddenly, men's bodies were on display, commodified, objectified. Men were performing for women's pleasure. The male body was broken down into parts: abs, chest, arms, butt, and judged, desired, consumed. Some men found this threatening. Cultural critics worried about the objectification of men, ironic, given centuries of objectifying women. Others saw it as egalitarian: if men could enjoy strip shows, why shouldn't women? The performers themselves had mixed experiences. Some enjoyed the work, the attention, the money. Others found it degrading or struggled with the physical demands and the commodification of their bodies. Sound familiar? The same dynamics that had always existed in female stripping now applied to men. But there was a key difference. Male strippers at Chippendales were rarely stigmatized the way female strippers were. They could appear on talk shows, be profiled in mainstream magazines, even parley their work into acting or modeling careers. The double standard persisted. Men stripping was cheeky fun, women stripping was still morally dubious. The expansion of male reviews. Chippendales' success spawned competitors. Hunkomania, Men of Steel, Thunder from Down Under, which relocated from Australia to Las Vegas and became a fixture there. Male reviews proliferated through the 1980s and 90s. Each had its own brand, its own style. Some went for the romance novel aesthetic, sensitive, caring men who wanted to please women. Others leaned into raw sexuality and aggression. Some featured storylines and characters, the fireman, the cop, the construction worker, playing into female fantasies the way female strippers had long played into male ones. Las Vegas became a hub for male reviews, just as it had been for topless showgirl reviews. The difference was that the male shows were often more successful, pulling in bachelorette parties and women's groups from across the country. The film The Full Monty, 1997, and later Magic Mike, 2012, brought male stripping into mainstream pop culture consciousness. Both films treated their stripper protagonists with humanity and humor, acknowledging both the pleasure and the absurdity of the enterprise. Beyond heteronormative frameworks. We also need to acknowledge that much of the early innovation in male stripping happened in gay clubs. Gay men had been appreciating male bodies in club settings for decades before Chippendales mainstreamed it for straight women. The leather scene, the go-go dancers in gay bars, the entire visual culture of gay male sexuality was built around celebrating men's bodies. This included striptease elements, drag performances that played with gender and sexuality, and an openness about desire that straight culture was only beginning to approach. As LGBTQ rights advanced, these performances became more visible and influenced mainstream culture. The line between gay and straight entertainment began to blur in interesting ways. Female audiences at Chippendales shows might not have known they were enjoying choreography and aesthetics influenced by gay club culture, but they were. And lesbian and queer women had their own relationship to strip culture, attending performances that weren't quite female burlesque, too male gaze oriented, and weren't quite gay male stripping, not for them, creating their own spaces and performances. The story of the Tease isn't just heterosexual. It's queer, it's gay, it's lesbian, it's trans. Every community has found ways to celebrate bodies, desire, and performance. Global perspectives on the Tease. The Western bias in our story. So far, we've focused primarily on Western, particularly American and British, traditions. That's partly because burlesque and Chippendales are Western phenomena, but it's also a limitation we need to acknowledge and correct. The Tease, the erotic performance, exists across cultures, but it takes vastly different forms and means different things depending on cultural context. Latin America, carnival and sensuality. In Brazil, the samba tradition embodies a very different approach to the body and sensuality. Carnival in Rio features thousands of dancers in elaborate costumes that reveal far more than they conceal: bikinis, body paint, feathers, jewels. The dancing is explicitly sensual, celebrating the body's movement and sexuality. But this isn't Western burlesque. It emerges from African diaspora traditions mixed with Portuguese Catholicism and indigenous influences. The body isn't shameful. Sensuality is celebrated as part of life. The tease here is in the movement, the rhythm, the collective joy of bodies in motion. Similarly, the tango in Argentina carries profound eroticism. The dance is about two bodies in intimate contact, suggesting passion, desire, sometimes heartbreak. The tease is in the tension between the dancers, the leg slides, the dramatic pauses, the way dancers seem to resist and yield to each other simultaneously. Latin American cabaret traditions, particularly in Havana before the Revolution, rivaled anything in Paris or New York for sophistication and sensuality. The Tropicana nightclub featured elaborate shows with showgirls in spectacular costumes performing choreographed numbers that were both artistic and provocative. The Caribbean, dancehall and wine. In Jamaica and Trinidad, dancehall culture developed performance styles that are intensely sexual and rooted in African diasporic traditions. Daggering, an aggressive, simulated sex dance style, pushes boundaries in ways that make Western twerking seem tame. Whining or whining, the hip rotation movement central to Caribbean dance, is often performed as a tease, with dancers demonstrating sexual prowess and desirability through movement. At fetes and carnivals, this is celebratory, joyful, communal sexuality, not the isolated performer-audience dynamic of burlesque. These traditions have influenced global popular culture, from dancehall's impact on hip-hop to soca's influence on pop music. But they're often misunderstood or appropriated without acknowledgement of their cultural origins and meanings. Middle East and North Africa, belly dance and controversy. Belly dance, a term many practitioners reject as reductive, has ancient roots across the Middle East and North Africa, though its exact origins are debated. What's clear is that these dance traditions involve expressive, often sensual movement of the hips, abdomen, and torso. In its cultural context, belly dance wasn't always or even primarily erotic entertainment. It was social dance, celebration at weddings, female community bonding. Professional dancers entertained at various events, and their performances could range from family-friendly to quite provocative depending on venue and audience. Western colonialism and Orientalism distorted these traditions. European and American audiences fetishized Middle Eastern dancers, stripping away cultural context and reducing them to exotic sexual objects. The harem fantasy and veil dance became Western burlesque staples, bearing little resemblance to authentic traditions. Meanwhile, in many Middle Eastern countries, professional belly dancing became stigmatized, associated with nightclubs and moral looseness. Dancers faced social disapproval even as they were popular performers. The colonizers' gaze changed how these cultures viewed their own traditions. Today, belly dance exists in complex spaces, traditional practice in home countries, diaspora communities trying to preserve culture, and Western women learning the dance, sometimes respectfully, sometimes as appropriation. Professional belly dancers in Cairo, Istanbul, or Beirut navigate conservative social pressures while maintaining a performance tradition. The tease in belly dance is subtle: a hip shimmy, the play of veils, the arched back, the direct gaze at audience members. It's powerful in its own context but means something very different than Western stripping. Asia, diversity and complexity. We've already discussed geisha traditions and Chinese opera, but Asia's relationship to erotic performance is extraordinarily diverse. In Thailand, cabaret shows featuring cat hui, trans women, have become famous tourist attractions, particularly in Pattaya and Bangkok. These shows feature elaborate costumes, lip-syncing performances, and physical beauty displays that include elements of tease. But they also exist within complex social dynamics around gender, tourism, and Thai culture's particular relationship to gender diversity. In Japan, modern host and hostess clubs offer a different kind of tease, one based on conversation, attention, and emotional rather than physical striptease. Customers pay for the company of attractive people who make them feel special, desired, important. It's a commodification of intimacy and flirtation more than sexuality. Meanwhile, Japan's pink film industry and sexual entertainment districts offer more explicit performances, from strip shows to various kinds of sex work. Post-war Japan developed a complex, sometimes contradictory relationship with sexuality, simultaneously repressed and wildly kinky, conservative in public discourse but with thriving subcultures. In India, the Devadasi tradition we discussed earlier was eventually suppressed under British colonial rule, criminalized as prostitution. The traditional dance forms survived but were reformed and purified of their more erotic elements. Today, classical Indian dance is performed in contexts ranging from temples to theatres, with ongoing debates about tradition, authenticity, and sexuality. Bollywood, meanwhile, developed its own form of tease, suggestive songs and dances that must work within censorship restrictions that forbid explicit sexuality or even kissing, though these rules have loosened. The item number featuring a glamorous actress in revealing costumes performing a sexually charged dance has become a Bollywood staple, a kind of sanctioned sensuality within otherwise family-friendly films. Africa, colonialism, tradition, and modern expression. African cultures have rich traditions of dance and performance, many with sensual or erotic elements. But colonialism severely impacted how these traditions were perceived and practiced. European colonizers often criminalized traditional dances they deemed too sexual, forcing African cultures to suppress or modify their own traditions. This is another form of cultural violence, being told your own body's expression is shameful. Post-colonial African pop culture has reclaimed and reinvented many of these traditions. Ndombolo from the Congo, Coupe de Kale from Côte d'Ivoire, Afrobeats from Nigeria, these music and dance forms often include provocative, sexually expressive movement. In South Africa, pantsular and com culture include dance elements that are simultaneously political resistance, cultural expression, and sexual display. The body becomes a site of reclamation after apartheid's attempt to control and restrict black bodies. But across the continent, there's also tension between traditional values, religious conservatism, both Christian and Muslim, and modern global culture. Performers navigate these tensions constantly. The universality and specificity of the tease. What becomes clear when we look globally is that while the impulse to tease, to use the body to provoke desire, to play with revelation and concealment seems universal, the specific forms it takes are deeply cultural. What's provocative in one culture might be modest in another. What's empowering in one context might be exploitative in another. What's artistic here might be scandalous there. Western burlesque and Chippendales are just two expressions of something humans have been doing forever, everywhere. To understand the tease fully, we have to resist the temptation to view our own cultural practices as the default and everything else as exotic variations. Neo-burlesque and the modern revival. The return of the tease. By the 1990s, Traditional burlesque was essentially dead in America. Strip clubs existed, but they bore little resemblance to the theatrical tradition of the Golden Age. The art had been lost. Then something unexpected happened. Burlesque came back. The neo-burlesque movement started in the mid-1990s, particularly in New York and Los Angeles, as performers began reviving the aesthetics and performance styles of classic burlesque. But this wasn't simple nostalgia. It was something new. Dieter von Teese is probably the most famous neo-burlesque performer. With her porcelain skin, black hair, and retro glamour, she embodied 1940s pin-up aesthetics while performing elaborate stripteases that referenced Sally Rand and Gypsy Rose Lee. Her famous martini glass routine, emerging from a giant martini glass filled with water, was pure theatrical spectacle. But von Teese also brought burlesque into mainstream culture. She appeared in fashion magazines, became a legitimate celebrity, dated Marilyn Manson, launched perfume lines. She made burlesque respectable again, or at least fashionable. The new burlesque aesthetic. Neo-burlesque differentiated itself from modern stripping in several ways. Theatricality. Performances were choreographed numbers with storylines, characters, and theatrical elements. Costumes were elaborate and often custom-made. Props were used creatively. Retro aesthetics. Most neo-burlesque drew heavily from 1920s to 1950s glamour, vintage lingerie, victory roles, pin-up styling. This created distance from contemporary stripping and connected to burlesque's golden age. Variety. Neo-burlesque shows featured multiple performers with different styles, plus comedians, singers, and other variety acts, recovering burlesque's original format as a revue rather than just a strip show. Artistic legitimacy. Performers framed their work as art, often with feminist or political messages. This wasn't just entertainment, it was performance art. Community. Neo-burlesque developed as a scene with workshops, conventions, competitions, and a sense of community among performers. It was a subculture with its own values and aesthetics. Diversity and body politics. One of neo-burlesque's most significant innovations was expanding who could be a burlesque performer. Classic burlesque had featured a fairly narrow range of bodies, conventionally attractive, slim or curvy women, almost entirely white. Neo-burlesque exploded those boundaries. Performers of all sizes began stripping proudly, reclaiming the beauty and sexuality of fat bodies. Body-positive burlesque became a movement within a movement. Performers of color created spaces to celebrate their bodies and challenge racist beauty standards. Burlesque troupes like Brown Girls Burlesque and Sable Nouveau Burlesque centered black performers and audiences. Trans and non-binary performers found in burlesque a space to celebrate their bodies and genders. Boylesque, male and masculine burlesque, grew as a parallel tradition, with performers creating their own aesthetic distinct from Chippendales. Disabled performers began appearing in burlesque shows, challenging assumptions about which bodies could be sexy and desirable. Performers worked with wheelchairs, prosthetics, and various physical differences, asserting their right to be sexual beings. This was genuinely radical. Burlesque became a space where marginalized bodies could be celebrated, where the tease wasn't about conforming to mainstream beauty standards but about each performer expressing their own sensuality and power. The feminist debates. Neo-burlesque positioned itself as feminist, but this was controversial. Debates raged within feminist communities about whether striptease could ever be truly empowering or whether it inevitably catered to male gaze and patriarchal sexuality. Some argued that burlesque allowed women to control their own sexuality, to present their bodies on their own terms, to reclaim the power of the tease. Performers emphasized consent, autonomy, and artistic expression. Critics countered that no matter how you frame it, stripping for an audience still operates within systems of objectification. They argued that choice feminism, the idea that any choice a woman makes is automatically feminist, ignores structural inequalities. These debates never resolved because both sides had valid points. Neo-burlesque could be empowering and still exist within patriarchy. Individual performers could have positive experiences and the larger industry could still be exploitative. These things can all be true simultaneously. What's notable is that neo-burlesque made these conversations visible. Performers wrote about their work, discussed it in feminist forums, created theoretical frameworks for understanding erotic performance. This was a level of self-reflection and public discourse that classical burlesque rarely had. The commodification and mainstreaming. By the 2000s and 2010s, burlesque had become trendy. Burlesque classes appeared in gyms and community centers, marketed to suburban women as sexy workout routines. Burlesque aesthetics influenced fashion, music videos, and advertising. This mainstream acceptance was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant less stigma for performers, more opportunities, bigger audiences. On the other hand, as burlesque became commodified, it lost some of its subversive edge. When Christina Aguilera starred in the movie Burlesque, 2010, the film bore little resemblance to actual burlesque. It was more like a PG-13 version with lots of costumes but minimal stripping. When burlesque becomes family-friendly, is it still burlesque? The tension between underground art form and mainstream entertainment, between subversive performance and commercial product, remains unresolved. Burlesque today. Contemporary burlesque exists in multiple forms simultaneously. Professional performers working burlesque theaters and festivals, making a living from the art. Amateur enthusiasts performing for fun and self-expression. Political performers using burlesque as protest or commentary. Teachers running classes and workshops. Corporate entertainment, with burlesque shows at private parties and events. Online content creators posting burlesque performances on social media and subscription platforms. The internet has transformed burlesque like everything else. Performers can build followings online, sell videos, and create content without needing traditional venues. This democratizes access but also means navigating platform censorship and content policies that often treat artistic nudity the same as pornography. The COVID-19 pandemic devastated in-person burlesque, forcing performers to adapt to virtual shows or stop performing entirely. Some thrived in the digital space, others struggled without the live audience energy that makes burlesque work. As venues have reopened, the scene is rebuilding, but it looks different than before. What hasn't changed is burlesque's fundamental appeal, the celebration of the body, the artistry of the tease, the playful relationship between performer and audience. In a world of instantly available pornography, burlesque offers something different: anticipation, personality, theater. The tease still matters. The politics of looking, gender, power, and the gaze. The male gaze theory. We can't discuss the history of the tease without addressing the fundamental question of looking. Who gets to look at whom? What does it mean to be the object of desire versus the subject experiencing desire? Feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey introduced the concept of the male gaze in her 1975 essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Her argument was that mainstream visual media is structured around a heterosexual male perspective. Women are presented as objects to be looked at. Men are active subjects who do the looking. This framework applies perfectly to traditional burlesque and striptease. The performances were created for men's pleasure. The female body was fragmented into parts, legs, breasts, curves, and presented for male consumption. Even when female performers had agency and artistry, they operated within a system where their value derived from male desire. The male gaze isn't just about men literally looking. It's about a whole cultural apparatus that positions women as objects and men as subjects. It shapes what women think is attractive about themselves, how they perform femininity, what they believe their bodies are for. Subverting the gaze. But here's where it gets interesting. Performers have always found ways to subvert, complicate, and play with the gaze. Gypsy Rose Lee's intelligence and wit forced audiences to see her as a person, not just a body. She looked back at them, judged them, made them feel seen. This disrupted the usual power dynamic. Mae West, though more associated with film than burlesque, embodied this subversion. She was openly, aggressively sexual on her own terms. She made jokes about men's bodies and sexual inadequacy. She reversed the gaze, making men the objects of her desire and judgment. In neo-burlesque, many performers explicitly play with the gaze. They might start a performance playing into conventional sexuality, then subvert it, removing their wig to reveal a shaved head, stripping down to reveal political slogans written on their body, incorporating humor that makes the audience laugh instead of just lust. Some performers make the audience uncomfortable on purpose, forcing them to confront their own voyeurism. Others create performances so weird and theatrical that they transcend simple sexuality. The question remains, can you truly subvert the gaze from within? Or does performing for an audience inevitably put you in the position of object, no matter how clever your subversion? The female gaze and Chippendales. When women became the primary audience for male strippers, something shifted. But did the power dynamics actually reverse, or did we just see a different version of the same dynamics? The female gaze, women's perspective on looking at bodies and desire, is theoretically different from the male gaze. It's often described as more relational, more interested in context and emotion, less focused on fragmentation and objectification. But Chippendales didn't really operate that way. Male strippers' bodies were objectified, broken into parts, abs, chest, biceps, presented for consumption. The performances played into fantasies of male attention and desire. Women screamed, grabbed, stuffed money into G-strings. So maybe the female gaze isn't inherently different. Or maybe commercial entertainment flattens genuine female desire into a mirror image of male desire because that's what sells. Some theorists argue that women's relationship to Chippendales and male stripping was always somewhat ironic. Women enjoyed it but also found it funny, ridiculous. They weren't really objectifying men the way men objectify women because women don't have the same structural power to reduce men to bodies. Others argue that's condescending. Women's sexual desires are real and valid, and there's nothing wrong with women enjoying looking at attractive male bodies. The double standard that says male desire is natural but female desire needs intellectual justification is itself sexist. These debates continue because they're fundamentally about power, gender, and how we understand sexuality itself. Queer gazes. The gay male gaze operates differently than the straight male gaze, even when both are looking at men. Gay desire exists outside heteronormative frameworks, in communities that have had to develop their own visual languages and codes. In gay clubs and performance spaces, the objectification of male bodies happens within a community of men. The power dynamics are different when you're part of the group being objectified. The performance can be more playful, more knowing, because everyone understands the context. Drag performance adds another layer. Drag queens performing femininity for audiences, historically gay male audiences, now more mixed, are simultaneously celebrating and satirizing femininity, embodying and critiquing gender itself. The tease in drag can be about gender performance as much as sexuality. Lesbian and queer women's gazes have been less commercially visible, operating in more underground spaces. When queer women look at other women, are they objectifying them like men do? Or is there something different about desire within the same gender? These aren't academic questions. They shape how performers create work, how audiences experience it, and what it means to everyone involved. The ethics of looking. Ultimately, we're left with difficult questions. Is it possible to enjoy erotic performance ethically? Can we look at bodies without objectifying people? Can performers maintain dignity and autonomy while being objects of desire? The sex-positive answer is yes, with consent, respect, and proper compensation. Erotic performance can be ethical and positive for everyone involved. Performers deserve respect, fair pay, and control over their work. Audiences can enjoy performances while recognizing performers' humanity. The radical feminist answer is more skeptical. Under patriarchy and capitalism, true consent and equality are impossible. Erotic performance will always be exploitative because it exists within exploitative systems. Most people exist somewhere in between, trying to navigate these tensions in practice. We can acknowledge problems while still valuing performers' work. We can enjoy erotic performance while advocating for better conditions and respect for performers. We can hold multiple truths simultaneously. The business of the tease. The economics of exposure. Let's talk about money, because the tease has always been a business. In burlesque's golden age, top performers could make substantial money, more than most women could earn in any other profession. Gypsy Rose Lee became wealthy. Sally Rand supported her family through the Depression. These women had financial independence unusual for their era. But the average burlesque performer made much less. They worked in difficult conditions, faced harassment, had no job security or benefits. Theater owners and managers took most of the profit. Performers aged out of the business quickly with few options afterward. The economics haven't changed as much as we'd like to think. Top neo-burlesque performers can make a living, but most supplement with other work. Class fees, workshop instruction, and merchandise often provide more reliable income than performance fees. Strip clubs operate on a different model entirely. In most American clubs, dancers are classified as independent contractors rather than employees. They pay the club a stage fee for the privilege of working, then make money through tips and private dances. The club takes a cut of private dance fees. This system pushes financial risk entirely onto dancers. A slow night means they lose money. They have no healthcare, no unemployment insurance, no worker protections. Club owners profit regardless of how well dancers do. Male strippers at established revues like Chippendales or Thunder from Down Under typically work as employees with salaries, a rare exception in the industry. But most male strippers work bachelor parties or private events as independent contractors, facing the same precarity as female strippers. Platform capitalism and online performance. The Internet has created new economic models for erotic performance. Platforms like OnlyFans, Patreon, and various cam sites allow performers to monetize content directly, without traditional venues or middlemen. This has genuine benefits. Performers control their content, set their own prices, keep a larger percentage of earnings, though platforms still take significant cuts, and work from home on their own schedules. No stage fees, no club owners, no dangerous working conditions. But platform capitalism has its own problems. Performers are subject to sudden policy changes, account deletions, payment processing issues. The platforms have enormous power over performers' livelihoods. Competition is fierce, requiring constant content production and social media promotion. There's also no privacy. Online content can be stolen, shared, used without consent. Performers face doxing, stalking, and harassment. The work is isolating. You're performing alone to a camera, without the energy of a live audience. And there's a class divide in online sex work, just like offline. Performers who are already attractive by conventional standards, who have marketing skills, who can invest in good equipment and sets do better. Those who are older, fatter, less conventionally attractive, or lack technical skills struggle. Labor rights and organizing. Sex workers, including burlesque and exotic dancers, have been organizing for labor rights for decades. Organizations like the Red Umbrella Project, the Exotic Dancers Alliance, and the Sex Workers Outreach Project advocate for decriminalization, labor protections, and destigmatization. Their demands are straightforward: treat sex work like work. That means labor protections, the ability to organize unions, access to legal recourse for exploitation, and an end to discrimination in housing, healthcare, and other areas. But sex work exists in legal gray areas in most places. In the US, prostitution is illegal almost everywhere, creating a climate where all sex work is stigmatized and workers are vulnerable to exploitation because they can't seek legal protection. Burlesque and exotic dancing are legal, but dancers still face discrimination. Being fired from a non-sex work job for having done burlesque or stripping is common. Banks have closed accounts of sex workers. Landlords refuse to rent to them. This stigma serves capitalism. It keeps workers divided: good women and sex workers, respectable jobs and degrading ones, preventing solidarity. It makes sex workers vulnerable and exploitable. The feminist sex wars redux. These economic realities feed into ongoing debates about sex work within feminism. Sex work exclusionary feminists argue that sex work is inherently exploitative, that women enter it due to poverty and lack of options, and that it should be abolished. They see the industry as fundamentally harmful to women. Sex work inclusive feminists argue that many women choose sex work freely, that it can be empowering, and that criminalization and stigma cause more harm than the work itself. They advocate for decriminalization and workers' rights. The evidence is complicated. Studies show that some sex workers report positive experiences, autonomy, and good earnings. Other studies document exploitation, coercion, and harm. Both things are true because sex work encompasses an enormous range of experiences from survival prostitution to high-end escorting to online content creation to burlesque performance. What's clear is that the worst outcomes for sex workers happen where the work is criminalized, where workers have no legal protections, where stigma prevents them from seeking help. Decriminalization correlates with better health and safety outcomes. But decriminalization alone doesn't solve problems created by poverty, racism, addiction, trafficking, and capitalism. We need comprehensive solutions, not simple answers. Technology, intimacy, and the future of the tease. Virtual reality and AI. Technology is changing how we experience the tease. Virtual reality porn and stripteases already exist, allowing users to experience performances in immersive 3D environments. AI-generated performers can create custom content, theoretically tailored to any user's preferences. This raises fascinating questions. If you're watching an AI-generated stripper, is it still a tease? There's no real person there, no genuine interaction. Is the appeal of the tease the physical body, or is it something more psychological? Some argue VR and AI will liberate sexuality from exploitation, no real people harmed, infinite variety, complete privacy. Others worry about deepening alienation and disconnection from genuine human intimacy. There's also the question of consent with AI. If an AI is trained on images of real performers without their consent, is that theft? If someone creates an AI version of a real person stripping, is that a violation? We're entering uncharted territory ethically and legally. Parasocial intimacy. Online platforms have created new forms of intimacy between performers and audiences. OnlyFans and similar services often include direct messaging, custom content requests, and ongoing interaction. This isn't just about sexual content. It's about connection, attention, the feeling of being special to someone desirable. Performers who succeed online often do so by creating the illusion of relationship, of genuine care and interest. This is parasocial intimacy. The audience member feels they have a relationship with the performer, even though it's fundamentally transactional and one-sided. The performer is working, playing a role, however authentic they might seem. Is this exploitative of audiences? They're paying for something that isn't real. Or is it just entertainment, no different from enjoying an actor's performance? Is it exploitative of performers? They're commodifying not just their bodies but their personalities, their time, their emotional labor. The boundaries between performance and genuine self blur dangerously. These questions matter because this model is spreading. More and more online content operates on parasocial intimacy. Influencers, streamers, content creators of all kinds cultivate feelings of connection with audiences who will pay for access. The tease has moved from the body to the self. The democratization and saturation. We live in an era of unprecedented access to sexual content. Free pornography is everywhere. Instagram and TikTok are full of people posting increasingly revealing content. Everyone can be their own burlesque performer, stripping for likes and followers. Has the tease lost its power when everyone is teasing? When nudity and sexuality are so readily available, does anticipation still matter? Some argue we're experiencing desensitization. The more extreme content has to be to register as exciting. The tease is dead because nothing is hidden anymore. Others argue the opposite. Precisely because explicit content is so available, the art of the tease becomes more valuable. Suggestion, mystery, personality matter more when bodies alone aren't enough. The evidence seems mixed. Strip clubs and live performances still draw audiences. People still pay for OnlyFans subscriptions when free porn exists. There's clearly something about the performance, the interaction, the human connection that pure access to images doesn't provide. But the industry has changed. Performers compete with infinite free content. The attention economy rewards constant novelty and escalation. Sustainability is difficult. The body-positive future. One genuinely positive trend is the expansion of who gets to be considered sexy and desirable. Social media has allowed people of all bodies, races, ages, genders, and abilities to present themselves as sexual beings and find audiences. This is revolutionary. For most of history, only narrow types of bodies were commercialized as sexy. Now fat performers, disabled performers, trans performers, elderly performers can all find audiences and make money. The tease is being democratized. Everyone can play with revelation and concealment, with the performance of sexuality. This has genuine liberatory potential. But it's also exhausting. The pressure to monetize your sexuality, to brand yourself, to compete in attention markets affects mental health. The democratization of the tease means everyone is expected to be performing, teasing, selling themselves constantly. Is this freedom or a new form of exploitation? What comes next? Predicting the future is foolish, but we can identify trends. Continued growth of online content creation and platformized sex work, increasing use of VR and AI in sexual entertainment, ongoing debates about consent, exploitation, and labor rights, expansion of body diversity in commercial sexuality, blurring lines between sex work, influencer culture, and mainstream entertainment, possible regulatory backlash as governments try to control online sexual content. The tease will continue because human sexuality will continue. We'll always be drawn to anticipation, to the space between concealment and revelation, to the performance of desire. But the forms it takes, who profits from it, who has access to it, and what it means will keep changing. Cultural conversations and controversy. The mainstreaming of stripper aesthetic. Something strange has happened in the past decade. Stripper aesthetics have gone mainstream. Pole dancing classes are marketed as fitness. Clear platform heels appear in fashion editorials. Music videos by major pop stars feature explicit strip club imagery. On one hand, this represents destigmatization. If suburban moms take pole fitness classes, then pole dancing isn't automatically shameful. If Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion celebrate strip club culture, then strippers are humanized. On the other hand, this is appropriation. Mainstream culture takes the aesthetics while continuing to stigmatize actual sex workers. The same society that celebrates Lizzo twerking in music videos discriminates against actual strippers seeking housing or healthcare. Real strippers and burlesque performers often have complicated feelings about this mainstreaming. They want respect for their work, but they also resent when people get credit and profit from aesthetics they created while actual sex workers remain marginalized. OnlyFans and social stigma. OnlyFans exploded during the COVID-19 pandemic as people looked for income while unemployed. The platform became synonymous with sex work, though it hosts all kinds of content. The public conversation around OnlyFans revealed persistent stigma. News stories portrayed it as desperate people degrading themselves for money. College students who created accounts were shamed, sometimes expelled. Teachers lost their jobs when OnlyFans accounts were discovered. But OnlyFans also sparked conversations about labor, autonomy, and stigma. Many creators spoke publicly about their work, challenging the narrative that sex work is always desperate or degrading. They discussed it as a business, compared it to other forms of content creation, and demanded respect. The platform even tried to ban adult content in 2021 due to payment processor pressure, then reversed course after massive backlash from creators whose livelihoods depended on it. This demonstrated both sex workers' vulnerability and their collective power. Bachelorette parties and public consent. Male strip shows, particularly Chippendale-style revues, have become bachelorette party staples. But this created conversations about consent and public sexuality. Videos of bachelorette parties at male revues show women groping performers, screaming, behaving in ways that would be completely unacceptable if genders were reversed. The performers are working, but they're also being touched without necessarily consenting to every interaction. This raises questions about the double standards around sexuality and consent. When women grab male strippers, it's considered funny. If men did the same to female strippers, we'd recognize it as assault. Some male performers have spoken about feeling objectified, uncomfortable, or harassed by female audience members. Their experiences matter, even if the broader context of male power means men don't face the same systematic dangers women do. The conversation about consent applies everywhere, including in erotic entertainment. Performers of any gender deserve boundaries and respect. Respectability politics in sex work. Within sex work communities, there are ongoing tensions about respectability politics. Some performers want to emphasize the artistic, empowering, legitimate aspects of their work to gain mainstream acceptance. Others resist respectability, arguing that all sex work deserves respect regardless of whether it's artistic or empowering. The respectability approach says, burlesque is different from stripping is different from prostitution. Some forms of sex work are more acceptable than others. This creates hierarchies where some workers are worthy of respect and others aren't. The anti-respectability approach says, all sex work is legitimate work, and creating hierarchies only serves to stigmatize the most vulnerable workers. A high-end escort shouldn't have to distance herself from a street prostitute to deserve rights and respect. These debates matter because they shape advocacy strategies and public perception. Do you win rights for sex workers by emphasizing the good ones, or do you fight for everyone's dignity regardless of the specifics of their work? There's no simple answer, but the trend among sex worker organizations has been toward inclusivity and away from respectability politics. Cultural appropriation and the tease. As we discussed in the global section, Western culture has a long history of appropriating erotic performance traditions from other cultures, belly dance, samba, various African and Caribbean dance forms, stripping them of context and commodifying them. This continues today. When a white performer does a tribal fusion belly dance in a burlesque show, is that appreciation or appropriation? When music videos feature twerking by non-black performers, what are the implications? These questions don't have universal answers. Some argue that dance and culture should be shared freely. Others point out that when marginalized cultures are punished for their own traditions, but privileged people can adopt those same traditions for profit and coolness, that's exploitation. The conversation often depends on specifics. Is the performer educated about the tradition? Are they profiting while people from the source culture face discrimination? Are they giving credit? Are they representing the tradition accurately or creating stereotyped caricatures? In burlesque specifically, there's been increasing awareness of these issues. Many events now have policies against stereotyped representations of cultures. Performers are encouraged to educate themselves and think critically about their choices. But tensions remain, and this work is ongoing. The tease in popular culture, film and television. The tease has been represented in popular media for as long as those media have existed. From pre-code Hollywood's risqué content to modern prestige TV's explicit scenes, the performance of sexuality has been entertainment. Some notable representations. Gypsy, 1962, the musical based on Gypsy Rose Lee's memoir brought burlesque to mainstream family entertainment. Natalie Wood's performance as Gypsy captured the theatricality and personality-driven nature of classic burlesque, even if it sanitized the sexuality. Showgirls, 1995, Paul Verhoeven's notorious film about Las Vegas strippers was initially panned as exploitative trash. But it's been reclaimed by some as camp masterpiece and serious commentary on capitalism and exploitation. Either way, it shaped public perception of stripping for a generation. The Full Monty, 1997, this British comedy about unemployed steelworkers forming a strip act to make money was sweet, funny, and humanizing. It treated male stripping as both absurd and dignified, showing working-class men's vulnerability and resilience. Burlesque, 2010, Christina Aguilera and Cher starred in this musical about a burlesque club. It bore little resemblance to actual burlesque but introduced the aesthetic to mainstream audiences. Magic Mike, 2012, and Magic Mike XXL, 2015, Steven Soderbergh brought artistic credibility to male stripper films. The first was a serious character study. The sequel was a joyful celebration of entertainment and female pleasure. Both films humanized male strippers and took the work seriously. Reality TV shows about burlesque performers, strip clubs, and exotic dancers have proliferated. These shows often exploit performers for drama while claiming to humanize them. The representation is usually mixed at best. Music videos and pop stars. Music videos have long incorporated striptease aesthetics. Madonna built her career partly on provocative sexuality and burlesque imagery. Artists from Britney Spears to Beyoncé to Ariana Grande have used strip club aesthetics in videos. Hip-hop culture has complex relationships with strip clubs. They're celebrated in lyrics. Rappers started their careers in strip clubs. Strippers are featured in videos. But actual strippers often aren't credited or compensated fairly, and the representation can be objectifying. Female rappers like Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, and City Girls explicitly celebrate strip club culture and their own experiences as strippers. They've brought strippers' perspectives into mainstream conversation in unprecedented ways. K-pop has incorporated Western burlesque aesthetics while navigating Korean cultural conservatism. The result is often tease without explicit sexuality, suggestive choreography and styling that implies more than it shows. Literature and memoir. Strippers and burlesque performers have increasingly told their own stories in memoir and essays. Books like Candy Girl by Diolo Cody, Rust Belt Femme by Rachel and Jolie, and Playing the Whore by Melissa Gyra Grant offer insider perspectives on sex work and challenge stereotypes. These books are part of broader sex worker activism and advocacy. By telling their stories, workers humanize themselves and challenge the narratives that dominate public discourse. Fiction has also engaged with striptease and burlesque, though often in ways that reveal more about cultural anxieties than about actual experiences. The stripper character appears frequently in literature, usually as either victim or femme fatale, rarely as a complex human being. Conclusion: what the tease tells us. We've traveled through millennia and across continents, from temple dancers to TikTok, from Salome to Chippendales. What have we learned? The tease is universal but culturally specific. Every culture has found ways to eroticize the body, to play with revelation and concealment, to make desire itself into performance. But what that looks like, what it means, who gets to do it, and what consequences follow vary enormously. The tease is about power. Whether it's women performing for men, men performing for women, or any other configuration, erotic performance always involves questions of who has power, how it's exercised, and what freedom exists within constraint. The tease is political. Throughout history, authorities have tried to control it, criminalize it, suppress it. From ancient Rome to Victorian England to modern America, those who perform sexuality have faced legal sanctions and social stigma. The body is always a battleground. The tease is economic. It's labor, it's business, it's how people make a living. The conditions of that labor, who profits from it, and how performers are treated matter immensely. Economic analysis is as important as cultural analysis. The tease is art. At its best, it's genuinely creative, theatrical, beautiful. The greatest performers have been artists, not just bodies on display. The craft matters, the choreography, the costume design, the performance skills that make a strip truly teasing. The tease is human. Behind every performance is a person with dreams, struggles, dignity, and agency. Whether we're talking about ancient temple dancers, Golden Age burlesque queens, or contemporary OnlyFans creators, these are human beings navigating complex systems as best they can. As we move into the future, the tease will continue evolving. Technology will create new forms. Social movements will keep challenging who gets to be sexy and desirable. Economic systems will shape how sexuality is commodified and consumed. But as long as humans have bodies and desires, as long as anticipation creates pleasure, as long as the space between concealed and revealed holds magic, the tease will endure. The question isn't whether the tease will exist, but who gets to perform it, under what conditions, for whose benefit, and what it means when they do. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the scandalous, sublime, complex, and utterly human history of the tease. This has been Nocturnal Natterings. Good night, and remember, sometimes what's hidden is more powerful than what's revealed.